Sometimes the most extraordinary people walk among us disguised as ordinary souls, carrying secrets that could silence a room full of mockers in an instant. What happens when society judges a book by its weathered cover, only to discover they're standing before a living legend? This is the story of Sarah Martinez, a woman whose torn work uniform became the canvas for one of the most shocking revelations a small-town diner had ever witnessed. In a world quick to judge and slow to understand, one rolled-up sleeve would expose not just a tattoo, but a truth so powerful it would forever change how an entire community saw courage, sacrifice, and the hidden heroes walking among them. The fluorescent lights of Murphy's diner buzzed overhead like angry wasps as Sarah Martinez pushed through the glass door, her work boots squelching against the black and white checkered floor. The familiar smell of grease and coffee hit her nostrils, but today it couldn't mask the stench of her own exhaustion. Her blue maintenance uniform, once crisp and professional, now bore the battle scars of a 12-hour shift that had turned into a nightmare of broken pipes, flooded basements, and emergency repairs that never seemed to end. The tear in her left sleeve ran from shoulder to elbow, exposing pale skin beneath. Grease stains decorated her chest like abstract art, and her steel-toed boots had accumulated enough mud to plant a small garden. Sarah knew she looked rough, but Murphy's was the only place open at 2 a.m, and she needed coffee before attempting the 30-minute drive home to her small apartment on the outskirts of Millbrook. The diner held maybe a dozen people scattered across red vinyl booths and chrome stools at the counter. Most were night shift workers like herself, truck drivers, and a few college students cramming for exams over bottomless cups of coffee. Sarah chose a corner booth away from the main crowd, hoping to blend into the shadows and nurse her coffee in peace. She hadn't even settled into her seat when the snickering started. "Look what the cat dragged in," came a voice from the booth behind her. Sarah recognized it immediately as belonging to Jessica Crawford, daughter of the town's mayor and self-appointed queen of Millbrook's social hierarchy. Jessica worked at the local bank, always impeccably dressed in designer suits and carrying handbags that cost more than Sarah made in a month. "I don't know how they let people like that into decent establishments," Jessica continued, her voice deliberately loud enough for half the diner to hear. "I mean, there should be standards. This isn't some truck stop on the highway." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept her eyes fixed on the laminated menu she'd read 100 times before. She'd learned long ago that responding only made these situations worse. Better to let them have their fun and move on to the next target. "Maybe she got lost on her way to the homeless shelter," added another voice. This one belonged to Marcus Reed, Jessica's boyfriend and a real estate agent who specialized in selling overpriced houses to city folks looking for their piece of small-town paradise. Seriously, who shows up to a restaurant looking like they crawled out of a sewer? The waitress, a middle-aged woman named Dolores who'd been working at Murphy's since before Sarah was born, approached with obvious reluctance. Her weathered face showed sympathy but also the wariness of someone who'd seen too many uncomfortable situations play out in this very diner.
"What can I get you, honey?" Dolores asked quietly, her pencil hovering over her order pad.
"Just black coffee, please," Sarah replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Large." "You sure that's all? You look like you could use a good meal." Sarah managed a small smile. Dolores had always been kind to her, treating her like a human being when others saw only a uniform and the stereotype that came with it. "Coffee's perfect, thanks." As Dolores walked away, the commentary from the booth behind continued. "I bet she doesn't even have a real job," Jessica said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Probably just picks up odd jobs here and there. Fixing toilets and unclogging drains. How absolutely disgusting. The kind of work no respectable person would ever do," Marcus agreed. "I mean, what kind of life is that? No education, no ambition, just getting dirty for minimum wage." Sarah's hands clenched into fists beneath the table. If only they knew the truth. If only they understood that she'd spent the last 12 hours preventing a catastrophic flood at the elementary school. That would have canceled classes for weeks. That she'd crawled through spaces no human should have to navigate, breathing in toxic fumes and risking electrocution, all to keep their comfortable lives running smoothly. But they didn't know, and they didn't care to know. To them, she was just another blue-collar worker, invisible until she became an object of ridicule. "Look at her hands," Jessica whispered, though not quietly enough. "Absolutely filthy. I wouldn't be surprised if she has diseases." They really should make people like that use the back entrance. The comment hit Sarah like a physical blow. She looked down at her hands, seeing them through their eyes. The nails were indeed dirty, embedded with grime that even industrial soap couldn't completely remove. Her palms were calloused from years of hard work, and a recent cut on her knuckle had left a small bandage that was now stained and fraying. These hands had saved lives. These hands had prevented disasters. These hands had pulled people from collapsed buildings and performed emergency repairs that kept entire neighborhoods safe. But all Jessica and Marcus saw was dirt. Dolores returned with the coffee, setting it down gently and giving Sarah's shoulder a brief, reassuring squeeze. "Don't let them get to you," she whispered. "Some people are just born mean." Sarah nodded her thanks and wrapped her hands around the warm mug, drawing comfort from its heat. The coffee was strong and bitter, exactly what she needed. He tried to focus on the caffeine spreading through her system, on the promise of home and a hot shower waiting for her. But the voices behind her wouldn't let her find peace. "Did you see her truck in the parking lot?" Marcus was saying, "Rust bucket with more dents than a golf ball, probably held together with duct tape and prayer. I'm surprised they let something like that on the road." "People like that are exactly what's wrong with this town," Jessica replied. "We're trying to attract quality residents, professionals who can contribute something meaningful to the community. Instead, we get drifters and manual laborers who lower the property values just by existing." The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. Her truck might look rough, but it was paid for. She owned her apartment outright, had money in savings, and hadn't taken a sick day in 3 years. Meanwhile, she knew for a fact that Marcus was drowning in debt from his flashy lifestyle. And Jessica still lived with her parents despite being 28 years old. "I heard she doesn't even have any family," Jessica continued, "probably for good reason. Who would want to claim someone like that?" This comment cut deeper than the others because it was partially true. Sarah's parents had died when she was 19, and she had no siblings. But she'd built her own family over the years, a tight-knit group of fellow veterans and blue-collar workers who understood loyalty, sacrifice, and the value of honest work. They were better family than most people ever found. "Maybe we should say something to Murphy about the dress code," Marcus suggested. "This is supposed to be a family establishment. Kids shouldn't have to see this kind of thing while they're eating. This is the book, it's about history." Sarah felt heat rising in her chest, a familiar anger that she'd spent years learning to control. She thought about leaving, just throwing some money on the table and walking out. It wouldn't be the first time she'd been driven away from a public place by people who thought they were better than her. But something stopped her. Maybe it was exhaustion. Or maybe it was the knowledge that running away only validated their cruelty. She'd faced down armed insurgents in Afghanistan, survived IED explosions and firefights that would haunt her dreams forever. She wasn't about to be intimidated by 2 spoiled adults who'd never faced real hardship in their lives. "Excuse me," came another voice from across the diner. Sarah looked up to see an elderly man in a veteran's baseball cap rising from his stool at the counter. His name was Frank Morrison, and she recognized him from the VFW hall where she sometimes attended meetings. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation, and I think you might want to reconsider your words." Jessica turned in her booth, her perfectly applied makeup unable to hide the annoyance on her face. "I'm sorry. Were you talking to us?" "I was," Frank replied, his voice steady but carrying an edge of authority that came from decades of military service. "See, I know that young lady over there, and you're making some assumptions that are not only wrong but downright offensive. I don't think this is any of your business," Marcus said, puffing up his chest in a display of false bravado. "We're having a private conversation." "Private?" Frank chuckled dryly. "Son, you're talking loud enough for everyone in here to hear you. And what I'm hearing is ignorance masquerading as superiority." Sarah felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment. She appreciated Frank's intervention, but she also knew it would only make things worse. People like Jessica and Marcus didn't like being challenged, especially not by someone they probably considered just another old-timer with outdated values. "Look, old man," Jessica said, her voice taking on a sharp edge. "I don't know what you think you know, but facts are facts. Some people contribute to society, and others just take up space. It's not our fault if the truth hurts." Frank's expression darkened, and Sarah saw his hands clench into fists. She quickly stood up, not wanting the situation to escalate further. The last thing Frank needed was trouble because of her. "It's okay, Mr. Morrison," she said quietly. "Really, I should be heading home anyway." But Frank wasn't backing down. He walked over to Jessica and Marcus's booth, his weathered face set in lines of determination that spoke of a man who'd seen too much injustice to remain silent. "You want to know about contribution?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "You want to talk about taking up space? Let me tell you something about that woman you're mocking." Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. Frank knew about her background, about her service record and the things she'd done that were better left buried. She'd worked hard to build a quiet life in Millbrook, to blend in and avoid the kind of attention that came with being known as a hero or a veteran with a complicated past. "Frank, please." she said. But he was already rolling up his sleeve to expose a faded Marine Corps tattoo. I served 3 tours in Vietnam, he said, his eyes never leaving Jessica's face. Lost good friends over there. Saw things that still wake me up at night. When I came home, I got spit on in airports and called a baby killer by people who'd never had the courage to serve their country. Jessica's confidence was starting to waver, but she wasn't ready to back down completely. That's very noble, but what does that have to do with anything?
It has to do with respect, Frank replied.
It has to do with understanding that you can't judge someone by their appearance or their job. It has to do with recognizing that the people who keep this country running are often the ones you never think about. Sarah could see where this was heading, and she knew she had to stop it before Frank revealed too much. Her past wasn't a secret exactly, but it wasn't something she advertised either. The people who needed to know already knew, and she preferred to keep it that way. But as she opened her mouth to interrupt, the diner door chimed again, and in walked Chief of Police Robert Hendricks. He was a good man, someone Sarah had worked with on several emergency situations, and she hoped his presence might calm things down. Unfortunately, Jessica seemed to see the chief's arrival as an opportunity to escalate the situation. Chief Hendricks, she called out, her voice taking on a fake sweetness that made Sarah's skin crawl. Thank goodness you're here. We're having a situation with some rather unsavory individuals who seem to think they can harass paying customers. Chief Hendricks looked around the diner, taking in the scene with the practiced eye of someone who dealt with more than his share of small-town drama. His gaze lingered on Sarah, and she saw recognition and something else in his eyes. Respect. What seems to be the problem here? He asked, though his tone suggested he already had a pretty good idea of what was really happening. These people, Jessica said, gesturing dramatically at Sarah and Frank, have been causing a disturbance, making threats, trying to intimidate us. I think they might be drunk or on drugs. The accusation hung in the air like smoke, and Sarah felt the familiar weight of judgment settling on her shoulders. This was how it always went. The people with money and connections made accusations, and people like her were automatically assumed to be at fault. But Chief Hendricks surprised everyone. Ma'am, he said to Jessica, his voice professional but cold. I've known Frank Morrison for 20 years, and that young lady for about 5. Neither of them has ever caused trouble in this establishment or anywhere else in my jurisdiction. So before you start making accusations, maybe you should consider whether the problem might be coming from your direction. Jessica's mouth dropped open in shock. This clearly wasn't how she'd expected the situation to play out. In her world, authority figures automatically sided with people like her against people like Sarah. I don't understand, she stammered. You're defending them? Look at her. She's obviously some kind of vagrant or criminal. People like that don't belong in decent society. The words seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet diner, and Sarah felt every eye in the place turned toward her. This is the book. It's about history. This was her worst nightmare, being the center of attention in the worst possible way. She just wanted to disappear, to go home and pretend this night had never happened. But Chief Hendricks wasn't done. People like what? He asked, his voice carrying a warning that even Jessica couldn't miss. People who work honest jobs? People who serve their community without asking for recognition or reward? Because if that's what you're against, then you and I have very different definitions of what makes someone worthy of respect. The chief walked over to Sarah's table, his expression softening as he approached her. You okay? He asked quietly.
I know these situations can be uncomfortable.
Sarah nodded, though she wasn't really okay. Her hands were shaking slightly, and she could feel the familiar tightness in her chest that came with too much stress and too little sleep.
I was just trying to get some coffee, she said.
I didn't want any trouble. I know you didn't, Chief Hendricks replied. You never do. That's one of the things I respect about you. His words carried weight that Jessica and Marcus couldn't possibly understand, but Sarah heard the deeper meaning. The chief knew her history, knew the things she'd done, and the reason she'd done them. His respect wasn't casual or misplaced. As the tension in the diner continued to build, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She was tired of hiding, tired of letting people like Jessica and Marcus define her worth based on their ignorance and prejudice. If they wanted to judge her, they could at least judge her for who she really was. Slowly, deliberately, Sarah began to roll up the torn sleeve of her uniform, exposing the skin beneath. The fabric was stiff with dried mud and grease, but it moved aside easily enough to reveal what lay hidden underneath. Frank Morrison saw it first, and his weathered face broke into a smile of recognition and pride. Chief Hendricks nodded approvingly, understanding exactly what Sarah was choosing to reveal. But for Jessica and Marcus, the significance of what they were about to see would be completely lost until someone explained it to them. They had no idea that they were about to witness something that would forever change their understanding of the woman they'd been mocking. The torn uniform that had been the source of their ridicule was about to become irrelevant, overshadowed by something far more important, hidden beneath its stained fabric. The silence that followed Sarah's decision seemed to stretch forever, broken only by the distant hum of the coffee machine and the soft clatter of dishes from the kitchen. Her fingers worked methodically, pushing the torn fabric up her arm inch by inch, revealing skin that told a story few people in Millbrook would ever expect. The first thing visible was a constellation of small white scars scattered across her forearm like stars against pale sky. Each one marked a moment of sacrifice, a piece of shrapnel or debris that had found its mark during operations most civilians couldn't imagine. But it was what lay beneath these battle scars that would shatter every assumption Jessica and Marcus had made about the woman they'd been ridiculing. As more skin came into view, intricate black ink began to emerge from beneath the fabric. Not the crude amateur tattoos that prejudiced minds might expect from someone in a torn work uniform, but something precise, detailed, and unmistakably military in its symbolism. Frank Morrison's chest swelled with pride as he recognized the familiar imagery taking shape. Chief Hendricks crossed his arms and settled back to watch the reaction of the two people who had been so eager to pass judgment just moments before. "What are you doing?" Jessica asked, her voice uncertain now, the confidence that had carried her through her earlier tirade beginning to waver. Sarah didn't answer immediately. Instead, she continued her methodical reveal until the full image was visible. There, etched in permanent ink across her forearm, was the unmistakable trident of the United States Navy SEALs. The golden eagle perched atop an anchor, its wings spread wide in defiance, seemed to stare directly at Jessica and Marcus as if challenging everything they thought they knew about the world. Below the eagle, the anchor was wrapped with rope, and a flintlock pistol lay crossed behind it, every detail rendered with the precision that marked it as the work of a master tattoo artist. But it wasn't just the quality of the artwork that commanded attention. It was what the symbol represented, what it meant about the woman who wore it, and the impossible reality that was slowly dawning on everyone in the diner. Marcus was the first to find his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. That's a SEAL trident. Very observant, Frank said dryly. "Tell me, do you know what someone has to do to earn one of those?" Jessica's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the color draining from her face. Her eyes darted between the tattoo and Sarah's calm expression, trying to reconcile what she was seeing with the assumptions she'd built her entire worldview around. "There has to be some mistake," she stammered. "Women can't be SEALs, it's impossible." Chief Hendricks stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of someone who dealt in facts rather than assumptions. "Actually, they opened all combat roles to women in 2013. The first woman to complete SEAL training graduated in 2021. And even before that, there were women serving in special operations support roles that required the same level of training and courage." Sarah finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "I was part of the cultural support team attached to SEAL Team 7. We conducted joint operations with Navy SEALs in Afghanistan from 2019 to 2002. The training was identical, the missions were identical, and the risks were identical." The words fell into the diner like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock that spread to every corner of the room. Other patrons had stopped their conversations, drawn by the drama playing out in the corner booth, and now found themselves witnesses to something extraordinary. Dolores, who had been quietly refilling coffee cups and trying to stay out of the confrontation, approached Sarah's table with something close to awe in her weathered face. "Honey," she said softly, "I had no idea. All these months you've been coming in here, and I never knew." "That's the point," Sarah replied, rolling her sleeve back down to cover the tattoo. "I didn't come home to be treated like a hero, or to have people make assumptions about who I am based on what I've done. I just wanted to live quietly and do honest work." But Jessica wasn't ready to let go of her worldview that easily. The revelation had shaken her, but years of entitlement and prejudice don't disappear in an instant. "Even if that's true," she said, her voice defensive, "it doesn't change anything. You still showed up here looking like a vagrant. You still don't belong in a place like this." The audacity of the statement hung in the air like a challenge, and Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. For years, she'd stayed quiet, avoided confrontation, let people believe whatever they wanted to believe about her. But there comes a moment in every person's life when silence becomes complicity, when walking away only enables the cruelty to continue. "You're right," Sarah said, standing up slowly. "I don't look like I belong here. I look like someone who's been working for 12 straight hours to prevent a catastrophe that would have affected this entire town. She gestured toward her stained uniform, her muddy boots, her torn sleeve. This grease, it's from crawling through the boiler room at Millbrook Elementary to repair a gas leak that could have exploded and killed children. The mud on my boots? That's from digging through a flooded basement to shut off a water main that was threatening to undermine the foundation of the senior center. Jessica opened her mouth to respond, but Sarah wasn't finished. The tear in my sleeve happened when I was pulling Mrs. Ann Henderson's cat out of a storm drain at 3 this morning because her granddaughter was crying and dispatch couldn't send anyone else. I've been awake for 18 hours straight, and I stopped here because I need caffeine to make it home safely. The diner had gone completely silent now. Even the kitchen staff had stopped what they were doing to listen to the quiet woman who had endured mockery and insults without defending herself until now. So, you're right, I don't belong here looking like this. I belong at home, asleep, recovering from keeping your comfortable little world running smoothly while you were tucked safely in your beds, probably dreaming about whatever trivial problems you'll complain about tomorrow. Frank Morrison started to clap, a slow, deliberate applause that was picked up by Chief Hendricks and then by Dolores and several other patrons. Within moments, most of the diner was applauding, and Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment she didn't deserve. "Stop," she said, raising her hand. "Please, I'm not telling you this to be praised. I'm telling you because someone needs to explain to these two that the world doesn't work the way they think it does." She turned back to Jessica and Marcus, both of whom looked like they wanted to disappear into their booth. "You want to talk about contribution? About taking up space?
Let me tell you what I've contributed." Sarah's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the surface now, the unmistakable authority of someone who had faced life and death situations and emerged stronger for it. In Afghanistan, my team conducted over 200 operations.
We gathered intelligence that saved American lives, rescued civilians from war zones, and helped track down some of the most dangerous terrorists in the world. I have 3 Bronze Stars, 2 Purple Hearts, and a Silver Star that I've never told anyone in this town about, because I don't need recognition for doing my job. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His earlier bravado completely evaporated. "We didn't know," he mumbled. "How are we supposed to know?" "You weren't supposed to know," Sarah replied. "But you were supposed to treat me like a human being regardless. You were supposed to understand that everyone has a story, and judging people based on their appearance or their job makes you small, petty people." She sat back down and picked up her coffee cup, her hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "I came home from war zones where children were murdered for going to school, where women were executed for the crime of learning to read. I've seen real evil, real suffering, real problems. And then I come to places like this and watch privileged adults mock working people for the crime of getting dirty while keeping society functioning." Chief Hendricks approached the table, his expression serious. "Sarah, I'm sorry this happened. These two owe you an apology, and frankly, they owe one to everyone else in here who heard their ignorant comments." But Sarah shook her head. "I don't want their apology. Apologies don't mean anything when they're forced out of people who don't understand why they should be sorry. What I want is for them to think about this moment the next time they see someone who looks different from them, who works a job they consider beneath them, who doesn't fit into their narrow definition of what valuable people look like." Frank Morrison had been quietly observing the exchange, and now he spoke up with the wisdom of someone who'd lived through enough history to understand its patterns.
"You know what bothers me most about this?" he said, addressing Jessica and Marcus directly.
"It's not just that you were cruel to someone who didn't deserve it. It's that your cruelty was so casual, so automatic. You didn't even have to think about it. You saw someone you perceived as beneath you, and your first instinct was to mock them." He gestured around the diner, taking in the other patrons who were still listening to every word. "Look around this place. See that man over there in the trucker hat? He delivered the food that's sitting in your refrigerator right now. The woman by the window? She cleaned the office building where you work, probably while you were sleeping peacefully in your bed. The young man at the counter? He's putting himself through nursing school while working 2 jobs to support his sick mother." Frank's voice carried the weight of decades, of a lifetime spent watching the world change while human nature remained frustratingly constant. "Every single person in here contributes something meaningful to the world. They work hard, pay their taxes, help their neighbors, and ask for nothing more than basic respect in return. And you gave them mockery instead." Jessica finally found her voice again, though she sounded far less confident than she had earlier. "But how were we supposed to know she was a veteran?" She doesn't wear a uniform or have any indication of her service. Because that's not the point, Sarah said wearily. The point is that my worth as a human being doesn't depend on my military service. The woman you were mocking before you knew about my background deserved the same respect as the veteran you're now trying to backtrack and apologize to. She stood up again, leaving a $5 bill on the table for her coffee. The maintenance worker, the janitor, the waitress, the truck driver, they all deserve respect. Not because of what they used to be, but because of who they are right now. Because they're human beings doing honest work and trying to live their lives without hurting anyone. As Sarah prepared to leave, Dolores approached with a fresh cup of coffee and a paper bag. "To go," she said quietly. "And there's a sandwich in there too. On the house. It's the least I can do." "Thank you," Sarah said, accepting the gesture with genuine gratitude. "You've always been kind to me, Dolores. I appreciate that more than you know." As Sarah headed toward the door, she could feel every eye in the diner following her. The silence was different now, no longer uncomfortable but respectful, like the quiet that follows a profound truth. But before she could reach the exit, Marcus called out to her. "Wait," he said, his voice uncertain. We want to apologize. We were wrong. Completely wrong."
Sarah stopped but didn't turn around.
"I told you I don't want your apology. What I want is for you to be better people. What I want is for you to remember this moment the next time you're tempted to judge someone based on their appearance or their job or their circumstances." She paused at the door, her hand on the handle. "And what I really want is for you to understand that the people you look down on are often the ones holding your world together. The next time you flip a light switch, or turn on a faucet, or drive down a road that isn't full of potholes, remember that someone who looks like me made that possible." With that, Sarah pushed through the door and stepped into the cool night air, leaving behind a diner full of people whose understanding of the world had been fundamentally challenged. The torn uniform that had been the source of such cruel mockery just an hour earlier now seemed like a badge of honor, proof of hard work and dedication rather than something to be ashamed of. As she walked toward her battered truck, Sarah could hear the muffled conversation starting up again inside the diner. She knew that some people would take the lesson to heart, would think more carefully before judging others in the future. Others would probably forget the entire incident by morning, too, set in their ways to change. But for the first time in months, Sarah felt something she hadn't expected to feel again. She felt proud. Not of her military service, though that was certainly something to be proud of, but of who she was right now. A working woman trying to make an honest living, serving her community in ways both big and small, carrying herself with dignity even when others refused to see it. The torn uniform would be washed and mended, ready for tomorrow's challenges. The tattoo would remain hidden beneath fabric, visible only to those who earned the right to see it. But the truth that had been revealed in Murphy's diner that night would ripple outward, changing conversations and challenging assumptions in ways that Sarah would never fully know. The morning after the confrontation at Murphy's diner arrived gray and cold, with the kind of persistent drizzle that made everything in Millbrook look slightly faded around the edges. Sarah woke in her small apartment to the sound of rain pattering against her windows and the distant rumble of her phone vibrating against the nightstand. 3 missed calls from dispatch, 2 text messages, and 17 notifications from social media accounts she barely used. Word traveled fast in a small town, and apparently the events at Murphy's had already taken on a life of their own in the digital ecosystem of local gossip and speculation. Sarah ignored the social media notifications and called dispatch instead. Marie, the overnight operator, sounded relieved to hear her voice. "Thank goodness," Marie said. "We've got a situation at the high school. Boiler room is flooding and the principal is panicking about classes being canceled. Can you get there within the hour?" "On my way," Sarah replied, already reaching for her spare uniform. The torn one from the previous night lay crumpled on her bathroom floor, stained beyond any hope of professional appearance. She'd deal with it later, maybe try to repair it, maybe just throw it away. Sometimes the casualties of a hard day weren't worth salvaging. 45 minutes later, Sarah pulled her rust-stained truck into the faculty parking lot of Millbrook High School. The building was a testament to small-town priorities and budget constraints. Built in the 1970s and maintained through a combination of determination, creativity, and prayer. She'd been called here dozens of times over the past 3 years, dealing with everything from broken heating systems to electrical emergencies that could have shut down the school for weeks. Principal Watson met her at the maintenance entrance, a thin man in his 60s, whose perpetual expression of worry had only deepened with the morning's crisis. "Sarah, thank God you're here. The boiler room is flooded, water's everywhere, And I have 800 students showing up in 2 hours for classes. Show me, Sarah said, grabbing her toolbox and flashlight from the truck. She followed Principal Watson down a narrow staircase into the basement, where the sound of rushing water grew louder with each step. The boiler room was indeed flooded, with 3 inches of murky water covering the floor and more streaming in from a burst pipe near the ceiling. The situation was serious but manageable, the kind of emergency that required quick thinking and careful execution rather than panic. How long has this been going on? Sarah asked, wading into the water to examine the damaged pipe. Janitor discovered it this morning around 5:30, Watson replied, staying safely in the doorway. Called the emergency plumber, but he said he couldn't get here until this afternoon. Said it wasn't life-threatening, so we were low priority. Sarah bit back her response to that particular piece of small-town service priorities. In her experience, problems that weren't life-threatening had a way of becoming exactly that when left unaddressed. I can fix this, she said, studying the pipe. But I'll need to shut off water to the entire building for about 3 hours. That means no bathrooms, no water fountains, nothing. Principal Watson's face went pale. 3 hours? With 800 students? That's impossible. The alternative is canceling school until the pipe can be properly replaced, which could take a week or more, Sarah replied. Your choice. 20 minutes later, Sarah was balanced on a stepladder in 3 inches of cold water, working to repair a pipe that should have been replaced years ago. The work was delicate and precise, requiring her to maintain pressure on a temporary joint, while applying sealant compound that would hold until a permanent repair could be made. She was deep in concentration when she heard voices from the stairwell above, multiple people, talking in the hushed tones that suggested they thought they were being quiet but were actually easily audible to anyone below. I still can't believe it, came a familiar voice that Sarah recognized as belonging to Tom Bradley, one of the science teachers. Jessica Crawford called my wife at 7 this morning, crying about how embarrassed she was. Apparently the whole thing is all over Facebook. What exactly happened? Asked another voice. This one belonging to Susan Martinez, the English department head. The story keeps changing every time someone tells it. From what I heard, Jessica and that boyfriend of hers were making fun of some maintenance worker at Murphy's last night. Turns out the woman was a Navy SEAL or something. Showed them her tattoo and basically humiliated them in front of the whole diner. Sarah's hand slipped slightly on the wrench and she had to steady herself on the ladder. She'd hoped the story would die down overnight, but apparently it was just getting started. A Navy SEAL? Susan sounded incredulous. Are you sure? I didn't think women could be SEALs. That's what I said, but my brother-in-law was there. He said. She showed them this elaborate tattoo and started talking about bronze stars in Afghanistan. Scared Jessica half to death. Good for her, Susan said with obvious satisfaction. Jessica Crawford has needed a reality check for years. Maybe this will teach her to think before she opens her mouth. Here's the thing, though. Tom continued, lowering his voice even further. I think the maintenance worker they're talking about is our Sarah. The description matches, and she wasn't answering her phone last night when Principal Watson tried to reach her about the boiler. Sarah's stomach clenched. She'd been careful to keep her military background separate from her work life, not out of shame but out of a desire for normalcy. The last thing she wanted was to become the subject of school gossip or to have her co-workers treat her differently because of her service record. Sarah Martinez? Susan sounded surprised, but she's so quiet. So, I don't know, ordinary. Are you sure we're talking about the same person? Ordinary, Tom chuckled. I guess that shows how much we really know about the people around us. I mean, she's been fixing our problems for 3 years, always professional, always reliable. Never caused any trouble. Never asked for special treatment. If she really is a veteran, it explains a lot.
Explains what? Susan asked.
The way she handles emergencies. Remember when the electrical fire started in the chemistry lab? She didn't panic, didn't wait for instructions, just walked in and dealt with it like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Most people freeze up in situations like that. Sarah continued working on the pipe, trying to ignore the conversation above. But it was hard to concentrate when people were discussing your life as if you weren't present, analyzing your behavior through the lens of information they'd gathered secondhand.
Thanks, Mother.
I feel terrible, Susan said. All this time I've been treating her like just another maintenance worker. Friendly enough, but, keeping that professional distance. If she really served in Afghanistan, if she's been through what Tom's describing, she deserves better than that. The question is, pretend we don't know? I don't want to make her uncomfortable, but I also don't want to act like nothing happened. Sarah had heard enough. She climbed down from the ladder, her boots splashing in the standing water, and called up the stairway. Mr. Bradley. Ms. Martinez? Could you give me a hand with something? The conversation stopped abruptly, followed by an awkward pause before both teachers appeared at the top of the stairs. Their faces showed a mixture of embarrassment at being overheard and curiosity about the woman they thought they'd known. "What do you need?" Tom asked, carefully making his way down the steps. "I need someone to hold this flashlight steady while I make the final connection," Sarah replied, handing him the light.
And, Ms. Martinez, could you hand me that roll of tape from my toolbox?
For the next 20 minutes, they worked together in relative silence, the two teachers following Sarah's instructions with the careful attention of people who knew they were out of their depth. It wasn't until the repair was complete and the water had stopped flowing that anyone addressed the elephant in the room. "Sarah," Susan said carefully, "we couldn't help but overhear some talk about what happened at Murphy's Diner last night. If you want to discuss it, we're here to listen. If you don't, we understand completely." Sarah wiped her hands on her coveralls and looked at both teachers. They were good people, she knew that. Tom had always been polite and respectful, and Susan had gone out of her way to thank her when she'd repaired the heating system in the English department during a particularly cold snap last winter. "What exactly did you hear?" Sarah asked. Tom shifted uncomfortably. "That you had some kind of confrontation with Jessica Crawford and her boyfriend. That they were making inappropriate comments and that you put them in their place. And that you served in Afghanistan," Susan added quietly. "That you're a veteran." Sarah nodded slowly. She'd known this moment would come eventually, had actually been surprised it had taken 3 years for her background to become public knowledge in a town the size of Millbrook. "I was in Afghanistan for 3 tours, she said simply. "Came back in 2002 and decided I wanted a quiet life. Millbrook seemed like a good place for that." "Why didn't you ever say anything?" Tom asked. "I mean, people around here respect military service." "You would have been treated differently better. That's exactly why I didn't say anything," Sarah replied, beginning to pack up her tools. "I didn't want to be treated differently. I wanted to be judged on my work, not on my history. I wanted to be Sarah the maintenance worker, not Sarah the veteran." Susan looked thoughtful. "But surely you understand that your service is something to be proud of, something that deserves recognition." "I am proud of my service," Sarah said. "But I'm also proud of the work I do here. I'm proud of the fact that I kept this school running through 2 major snowstorms, a power outage that lasted 3 days, and more plumbing emergencies than I can count. I don't need recognition for my military service to validate my worth as a person." She paused, considering how much to share. These were people she worked with, people who deserved honesty even if the truth was more complicated than they might expect. "The thing is, when people know you're a veteran, especially a combat veteran, they start making assumptions. Either they put you on a pedestal and act like you can do no wrong, or they treat you like you're damaged goods who might snap at any moment. Both reactions make it hard to just live your life." Tom nodded slowly. "I think I understand. You wanted to be judged on your current actions, not your past achievements." "Exactly. And for 3 years that worked. I had coworkers who respected my skills, a community that valued my contributions, and a sense of purpose that came from doing work that mattered. What happened last night? It complicated things." "How so?" Susan asked. Sarah finished packing her tools and stood up, her boots still squelching in the remaining water. "Because now everyone knows. And the story that's being told doesn't really about a maintenance worker being disrespected. It's about a hero revealing her secret identity to shame some bullies. It's more dramatic, more satisfying, but it's not really accurate." She looked at both teachers seriously. "I wasn't trying to be heroic last night. I was tired, frustrated, and tired of being treated like garbage by people who think blue-collar work is beneath them. I showed my tattoo because I wanted them to understand that they were wrong about me, but more importantly, that they were wrong about what makes someone worthy of respect."
The water pump Sarah had set up earlier finished its work, and the sudden silence felt heavy with unspoken questions and realizations.
"What happens now?" Tom asked. "Now I go home, take a shower, and hope this all blows over," Sarah replied. "What happens with you two is up to you. You can treat me exactly the same as you always have, which I would prefer. Or you can start acting different because you know about my background, which would make work uncomfortable for everyone." Susan spoke first. "I think I speak for both of us when I say that nothing has to change. You're still the person who saved our heating system, who's always responded when we needed help, who's been professional and reliable for 3 years. Learning about your military service doesn't change any of that. It does add another layer of respect," Tom added. "But respect for who you are now, not just what you used to do."
Sarah felt some of the tension leave her shoulders.
"Thank you. That means more than you know." As they climbed out of the flooded basement, Principal Watson was waiting with an expression of barely controlled anxiety. "Please tell me you fixed it," he said. "Fixed," Sarah confirmed. "Water's back on, heat should be working normally. The temporary repair should hold until you can get a plumber in to do permanent work on the weekend." "You're a lifesaver," Watson said, relief evident in his voice. "What do I owe you for the emergency call?" "Bill the district like always," Sarah replied. "Though you might want to start budgeting for some major plumbing upgrades. This building is old, and these emergency repairs are going to become more frequent." As Sarah walked back to her truck, she could see students beginning to arrive for classes, normal teenagers dealing with normal problems, unaware that their school day had been saved by someone they probably didn't even notice. It was exactly the way she preferred it, but as she drove away from the school, Sarah knew that her quiet anonymity in Millbrook was probably over. The story from Murphy's Diner would continue to spread, would be embellished and retold until it bore little resemblance to what actually happened. She would become the subject of curiosity and speculation, the local celebrity she'd never wanted to be. The question was whether she could find a way to reclaim her privacy and return to the simple dignity of honest work, or whether the revelation of her past would forever change how she fit into the community she'd chosen as home. By Thursday evening, 3 days after the incident at Murphy's Diner, Sarah's phone had become a constant source of irritation. Local news reporters, veterans organizations, and what seemed like half the town of Millbrook had somehow gotten her number and were calling with requests for interviews, invitations to speak at events, and offers of recognition she didn't want. Sarah sat in her small living room watching the local 6 o'clock news with a mixture of fascination and horror as they ran a segment titled "Local Hero Serves Community in Silence." The story featured grainy cell phone footage someone had taken outside Murphy's Diner that night, interviews with patrons who claimed to have witnessed the confrontation, and enough speculation about her military record to make her consider changing her name and moving to another state. Sources tell Channel 7 that the mystery maintenance worker is actually a decorated Navy SEAL who served multiple tours in Afghanistan, the overly enthusiastic reporter announced. While she has declined our request for comment, neighbors describe her as a quiet, hardworking woman who has lived in Millbrook for 3 years. The package included an interview with Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman whose cat Sarah had rescued from the storm drain. Mrs. Henderson beamed at the camera as she described how that lovely girl had crawled into a flooded drainage pipe at 3 a.m. to save Whiskers, all without asking for thanks or recognition. "I had no idea she was a war hero," Mrs. Henderson said, "but it makes perfect sense. Only someone with that kind of training and courage would risk their life for an old woman's cat." Sarah turned off the television and rubbed her temples, feeling a headache building behind her eyes. The story being told bore little resemblance to her actual life or motivations, but it was becoming the official narrative whether she liked it or not. A knock at her door interrupted her brooding. Through the peephole, she could see Frank Morrison standing on her small front porch holding what appeared to be a covered casserole dish. "Frank," she said, opening the door. "What are you doing here? Thought you might be going a little crazy with all the attention," he replied, holding up the dish. "My wife made her famous tuna casserole. Figured you might not feel like cooking with reporters camping out in your parking lot." Sarah looked past him and sure enough, there was a white van with Channel 7 News emblazoned on the side parked across the street. "How long have they been there?" "About 2 hours according to your neighbor in 4B. Don't worry, I had a word with them about respecting people's privacy. Sometimes the uniform still carries weight, even when it's 40 years old." Sarah invited Frank inside, grateful for the company and the reminder that not everyone in Millbrook had lost their minds over the past few days. Frank had been through his own homecoming challenges after Vietnam, and she valued his perspective on navigating unwanted attention. "So," Frank said, settling into her small kitchen chair, "how are you holding up?"
"I've been better," Sarah admitted, accepting the casserole gratefully.
"I knew this would happen eventually, but I thought I'd have more control over how and when my background became public. This whole thing has taken on a life of its own." "That's the thing about small towns," Frank said. "Good news travels fast, bad news travels faster, and hero stories travel at the speed of light. Especially when the hero doesn't want to be called a hero." Sarah poured coffee for both of them and sat down across from Frank. "I'm not a hero, Frank. I did my job, came home, and tried to build a normal life. Now everyone wants to turn me into some kind of symbol." "Maybe," Frank replied, "but maybe they need a symbol right now. Have you seen what's been happening since Monday night? Have you heard the conversations people are having?" Sarah shook her head. She'd been deliberately avoiding most public places, trying to let the attention die down. Mrs. Patterson at the grocery store started a discussion about how we treat service workers in this town, Frank continued. The mayor called an emergency town council meeting to talk about recognizing essential workers. 3 different veterans groups have started outreach programs to identify and support other veterans who might be living quietly in the community. He leaned forward, his weathered hands wrapped around his coffee mug. I know you didn't ask for this, and I know it makes you uncomfortable. But what happened Monday night opened people's eyes to things they should have been seeing all along. Before Sarah could respond, another knock at the door interrupted them. This time it was Chief Hendricks, looking official and slightly apologetic. Sarah, sorry to bother you at home, he said when she answered the door. But we've got a situation downtown that could use your expertise. What kind of situation? Unnautically reaching for her jacket. Water main break on Main Street. It's flooding the basement of the community center where they're supposed to hold the emergency shelter tonight. Temperatures dropping, and we've got a homeless population that needs somewhere warm to sleep. Sarah was already grabbing her tool bag. How long do I have? 6 hours, maybe 7 before people start arriving. The county emergency management folks say they can't get a crew here until morning, but that's too late. Frank stood up as well. Need an extra pair of hands? I'm not as young as I used to be, but I still remember how to hold a flashlight and follow orders. 20 minutes later, Sarah found herself wading through ankle-deep water in the basement of the Millbrook Community Center, accompanied by Frank Morrison, Chief Hendricks, and a small crowd of volunteers who had appeared seemingly out of nowhere when word spread about the emergency. The water main break was significant but manageable, the kind of repair that required careful planning and precise execution rather than specialized equipment. Sarah had dealt with similar problems dozens of times, but usually without an audience of concerned citizens watching her every move. Okay, she announced after assessing the damage. I need the water shut off at the street, which means coordinating with the city water department. I need sandbags to divert the remaining water away from the electrical systems. And I need everyone who isn't directly helping to clear out of here so I can work safely. Rather than dispersing, the volunteers organized themselves with military precision. Tom Bradley appeared with a group of high school students carrying sandbags. Dolores from Murphy's Diner arrived with coffee and sandwiches for the work crew. Even Principal Watson showed up with a team of janitors and maintenance staff from the school district. This is what I was talking about, Frank said quietly as he helped Sarah position a temporary clamp around the broken pipe. Monday night didn't just change how people see you. It changed how they see themselves, how they see their responsibility to the community. Sarah looked around at the organized chaos surrounding them. Teachers, shop owners, retirees, and teenagers all working together to solve a problem that would have fallen entirely on her shoulders just a week ago. It was gratifying to see the community come together, but also deeply uncomfortable to know that her personal revelation had been the catalyst. I just wanted to fix pipes and live quietly, she muttered, adjusting her wrench for better leverage. I know, Frank replied. But sometimes life has other plans. The repair took 4 hours, but with the organized volunteer effort, they also managed to clean and dry the entire basement, set up the emergency shelter ahead of schedule, and create a template for rapid response that would serve the community for years to come. As the work wound down, Sarah found herself surrounded by people who wanted to thank her, not just for the evening's repair work, but for what they were calling her service to the community. The attention made her skin crawl, but she could see genuine appreciation in their eyes, a recognition that went beyond celebrity worship to actual understanding.
Sarah, called a voice from across the room.
She turned to see Mayor Crawford approaching, and her stomach clenched as she recognized Jessica's father. He was a tall man in his 60s with the kind of confident bearing that came from a lifetime of local political success. Mr. Mayor, Sarah replied carefully, wondering if this was going to be another confrontational situation. I wanted to apologize, he said, his voice carrying easily across the room and drawing the attention of everyone present. My daughter told me what happened Monday night, and I'm ashamed of the way she behaved. There's no excuse for treating anyone the way she treated you. The room had gone completely quiet, and Sarah felt the familiar heat of embarrassment rising in her cheeks. This was exactly the kind of public spectacle she'd been trying to avoid. That's between Jessica and me, Sarah replied. But I appreciate you saying so. No, it's not, Mayor Crawford said firmly. It's between Jessica and this entire community. The way we treat our neighbors, especially those who serve us in essential roles, reflects on all of us. My daughter's behavior was unacceptable, and it's my responsibility as both her father and as mayor to make sure something like this doesn't happen again. He pulled out a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. Which is why I'm announcing that next week, the town council will vote on a formal resolution recognizing the contributions of all our essential workers, not just during emergencies, but every day. We're also establishing a community service award to honor people who serve quietly without seeking recognition.
Sarah felt trapped by the public attention, but she also recognized the sincerity in the mayor's words and actions. This wasn't political theater, but genuine remorse and a desire to make meaningful change.
That's very thoughtful, she said. But I hope you understand that I didn't reveal my background to seek recognition or rewards. I did it because I was tired of being treated like I was invisible or worthless. I do understand, Mayor Crawford replied, and that's exactly why this recognition is important. Not to reward heroes, but to acknowledge the heroism that exists in everyday work, in the people who keep our community functioning while asking for nothing more than basic respect. As the crowd began to disperse, Chief Hendricks approached Sarah with a thoughtful expression. We've been talking about expanding our emergency response capabilities. Someone with your background and skills could be valuable as a consultant or coordinator. I already have a job, Sarah replied automatically. I know, and you're good at it. But what if you could do that job and also help train other people to respond to emergencies? What if you could help make sure that the next time something like this happens, we have a whole team of people who know what they're doing? Sarah considered the suggestion. It was appealing in a way she hadn't expected. The idea of sharing her skills, of building resilience in her community rather than just responding to crises after they occurred. Let me think about it, she said. As Sarah finally headed home near midnight, exhausted but satisfied with the evening's work, she reflected on how much had changed in just a few days. The quiet life she'd built was probably gone forever, but maybe that wasn't entirely a bad thing. Maybe there was a way to find meaning in being visible, in using her skills and experience to build something larger than just her own comfortable anonymity. The reporter's van was gone from her parking lot, and her phone had finally stopped buzzing with interview requests. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new ways to define what it meant to serve her community. But tonight, Sarah was content to know that 43 homeless people would sleep warm and dry because she'd been able to fix a broken pipe, and that an entire community had come together to make it happen. Whatever came next, that was a foundation worth building on. 6 months later, Sarah Martinez stood at the podium of the Millbrook High School auditorium, looking out at an audience that would have terrified her more than any combat zone she'd ever encountered. 300 folding chairs filled with community members, local officials, and a group of veterans who had traveled from 3 counties away to attend what the local newspaper had dubbed the first annual Millbrook Community Heroes Celebration. The torn uniform from that night at Murphy's Diner had been professionally framed and now hung in the lobby of the community center, not as a monument to her personal story, but as a reminder that heroism often comes disguised as ordinary work clothes. The inscription below it read, "In honor of all who serve their communities without seeking recognition." Sarah adjusted the microphone and looked down at her notes, then folded them up and put them aside. After 6 months of speaking at schools, veterans meetings, and community events, she'd learned that the best speeches came from the heart rather than prepared remarks. When I moved to Millbrook 3 years ago, she began, her voice carrying easily across the silent auditorium, I thought I was looking for a place to hide. I was wrong. I was looking for a place to heal, to grow, and to find a new way to serve. She paused, scanning the familiar faces in the audience. Front row center sat Mrs. Henderson with Whiskers the cat in a carrier beside her chair, both of them looking well-fed and content. Dolores from Murphy's Diner occupied the third row, having been honored earlier in the evening for 15 years of feeding late-shift workers and treating everyone who walked through her doors with dignity and kindness.
6 months ago, I was just another maintenance worker, trying to do my job and go home quietly.
I thought that was enough. Thought that keeping my head down and avoiding attention was the best way to contribute to this community. What I learned that night at Murphy's Diner and in all the months since is that visibility has a responsibility. In the back of the auditorium, Sarah spotted Jessica Crawford sitting next to her father. The past 6 months had been transformative for Jessica as well, though in ways she probably never could have anticipated. After the public embarrassment of her behavior that night, she'd initially retreated from community life entirely, embarrassed and defensive about what she saw as unfair treatment. But gradually, with encouragement from her father and some gentle guidance from people like Frank Morrison, Jessica had begun to understand that the real issue wasn't her ignorance about Sarah's background, but her willingness to mock and demean someone based on their appearance and occupation. She'd started volunteering at the community shelter, working alongside the same homeless population she'd once viewed with suspicion and disdain. The truth is, Sarah continued, we all serve in different ways. The teacher who stays late to help struggling students, the nurse who works double shifts during flu season, the store clerk who remembers your name and asks about your family,
the teenager who shovels snow for elderly neighbors without being asked. Service isn't about wearing a uniform or having a title. It's about seeing what needs to be done and doing it, whether anyone's watching or not. The audience included dozens of people who had answered that call over the past 6 months. Tom Bradley had organized a program to train high school students in basic emergency response and community service. Principal Watson had established a mentorship program pairing students with local tradespeople to learn practical skills while earning community service credits. Chief Hendricks had indeed convinced Sarah to serve as emergency response coordinator, a part-time position that allowed her to continue her maintenance work while also training volunteers and developing protocols for community-wide emergencies. The program had already proven its worth during a late spring flood that could have caused catastrophic damage if not for the organized response of trained volunteers. Some of you know that I served in Afghanistan, and that experience shaped me in ways I'm still discovering, Sarah said.
But what I learned there about courage, sacrifice, and the importance of mission over self has been reinforced every day by the people in this community who embody those same values without ever thinking of themselves as heroes. Frank Morrison sat in the front row wearing his dress uniform for the first time in decades, his chest decorated with ribbons that told the story of service in a different war, but with the same underlying commitment to something larger than himself.
Beside him sat a dozen other veterans who had emerged from quiet anonymity to form a support network for military families and returning service members. The night this all started, I was angry and tired and frustrated with being invisible. I thought respect was something I had to demand, something I had to prove I deserved by revealing my credentials and forcing people to acknowledge my worth. What I've learned is that real respect is something we build together, day by day, through our actions and our treatment of others. Sarah's eyes found Mayor Crawford in the fourth row, flanked by the other members of the town council who had unanimously approved not just the community service recognition program, but a comprehensive policy addressing how municipal workers and contractors were treated by both officials and citizens. The policy had become a model for other small towns dealing with similar issues of class division and respect for blue-collar work. The woman who was mocked that night for her torn uniform and dirty hands was doing exactly what she should have been doing. She was serving her community, solving problems, keeping the infrastructure running that allows all of us to live comfortable lives. The fact that her service was invisible didn't make it less valuable. The fact that her work was unglamorous didn't make it less essential. Marcus Reed sat near the back, looking uncomfortable but present. He had the hardest time adjusting to the new social dynamics in Millbrook, struggling with the reality that his attitude toward working-class people had been not just wrong but actively harmful. He'd eventually found a way to contribute by using his real estate connections to help veterans and other essential workers find affordable housing, though he still seemed awkward around Sarah when their paths crossed. What we've built together over these past 6 months is something I never could have imagined. Not just programs and policies, but a culture of recognition and respect for all the different ways people contribute to our shared life. We've learned to see the heroism in everyday work, the courage in quiet service, and the strength in communities that take care of all their members. Sarah paused again, looking at the faces that had become familiar through months of collaboration, conflict, and gradual understanding. Some were people she'd known before that night at Murphy's. Others had entered her life as a result of the visibility she'd initially resented. I want to tell you about something that happened last week, she continued. I was called to repair a heating system at the elementary school, and when I arrived, there was a group of second graders waiting in the hallway. Instead of ignoring me or treating me like I was invisible, they greeted me by name. They knew what I was there to do, and they thanked me for keeping their school warm. The audience chuckled at the image, but Sarah's voice grew serious. Those children have grown up in a community that teaches them to recognize and appreciate the work that makes their lives possible. They understand that the person who fixes their heat, cleans their classrooms, and serves their lunch in the cafeteria are valuable members of their community worthy of respect and gratitude. That's the real change we've made here. The auditorium erupted in sustained applause, and Sarah had to wait several moments for it to quiet down. But I want to be clear about something. The recognition we're celebrating tonight isn't an endpoint, it's a beginning. Respect isn't something you achieve once and then maintain forever. It's something you build and rebuild every day through your actions, your words, and your willingness to see the humanity in everyone you encounter. She gestured toward the framed uniform in the lobby, visible through the open auditorium doors. That torn uniform represents more than just one person's story. It represents every working person who has ever been judged by their appearance rather than their character, every service worker who has been treated as invisible, every essential worker who has been taken for granted until a crisis makes their value impossible to ignore. Sarah began to wrap up her remarks, knowing that the real work happened not in speeches, but in the daily interactions that would define Millbrook's future. 6 months ago, I thought I wanted to be invisible. What I really wanted was to be seen clearly, for who I truly am and what I actually contribute. That's what we all want, and that's what we all deserve. The difference is, now we're all committed to making sure everyone gets that kind of recognition.
She looked directly at Jessica Crawford, who met her eyes and nodded slightly.
They had spoken privately several weeks earlier, a conversation that had been awkward but necessary.
Jessica had apologized again, more thoughtfully this time, and Sarah had accepted the apology while making it clear that the real test was not in words but in sustained change of behavior. Tomorrow I'll go back to my regular job. 2. I'll respond to emergency calls, fix broken pipes, repair heating systems, and handle whatever maintenance challenges come my way. But I'll do it as part of a community that understands the value of that work, that recognizes the dignity and honest labor, and that treats all its members with the respect they deserve.
The final applause was longer and more enthusiastic than before, but Sarah barely heard it. She was already thinking about the emergency response training session scheduled for the next weekend, the mentorship program that needed more volunteer coordinators, and the dozen small ways the community had committed to building on the foundation they'd established.
As she left the podium, Sarah caught sight of her reflection in the window at the back of the auditorium. She was wearing dress clothes instead of her work uniform, but underneath the formal attire, the sealed trident tattoo remained hidden on her forearm, visible only when she chose to reveal it.
The difference was that now it didn't matter whether anyone could see it or not. Her worth wasn't defined by her military service any more than it was diminished by her blue-collar work.
She was valued for who she was in the present moment, for the daily choices she made to serve her community and treat others with dignity. 6 months after a torn uniform had exposed a truth that changed everything, Sarah Martinez had found what she'd been searching for all along, a place where she could be fully herself, where her contributions were recognized and valued, and where the work of building a better community was shared by everyone who called Millbrook home.
The torn uniform in the lobby would remain there as a reminder that the real memorial to that night was the living community they had all helped to create. One conversation, one act of respect, and one moment of recognition at a time.
They laughed at her torn uniform. Seconds later, the seal tattoo changed everything.